Welcome to Talk Travel with Heather Tate, North Mississippi's podcast for savvy travelers. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is a weekly podcast that airs every Monday on the Shark 102.3 FM radio station based in Ripley, Mississippi, and is then released as a podcast. Travel advisor and travel enthusiast Heather Tate of Whimsical Destinations gives listeners expert travel tips curated through the years of personal and professional experience. By clicking subscribe, you'll have a new travel tip to add to your collection delivered to your podcast library every Monday. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is brought to you by Sun Bear Studio. Sun Bear Studio is a boutique recording studio in the heart of Ripley, Mississippi. When you record with us at Sun Bear Studio, we can mix, master, register, and publish your music, your podcast, or your family story. Email us when you're ready at sunbear@jc.media.
This program was recorded at Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi.
Good morning, Northeast Mississippi travelers. This is Heather with Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I'm so excited to share my tried and true tips and adventures with you. Whether you are also a seasoned traveler, a hopeful traveler, or currently an armchair traveler, meaning you're going to follow along with us from home for now. This is our 197th episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and this week is called All's Fair at the World's Fair. Now, I wish I could build a time machine to go back and visit some of the most historic World's Fair expositions. These were where the countries of the world came together to showcase their latest inventions, greatest architectural and technological wonders from the late 18th century through the 20th century. Now, in case you weren't sure what I was talking about, these were these expositions that were all throughout the world, different cities, where they would build structures. Most of them were not permanent, but they would build these structures, pavilions, and have exhibits. And everyone would come and they're basically showing off, like, look what we did. And some of these structures you may actually be familiar with and not even know they were associated with the World's Fair. And others you may be very familiar with. But so what happened after each World's Fair? These structures were often dismantled, disposed of. Some were relocated, which I find very interesting. And they were relocated to other locations, sometimes in other parts of the country, sometimes to completely different countries. Some just, they were completely disposed of. And a few are in their original locations. So when was the first World's Fair? Well, London, England had the first World's Fair. 1851 is credited for being the first World's Fair. It was known as the Great Exhibition, and it featured the Crystal Palace, which is an iconic part of London. But when I hear the Crystal Palace, and if you've ever been to Disney World, if you've heard of the Crystal Palace, you might think of something else, and that is a restaurant within the Magic Kingdom that is actually near the castle, and it is where the Winnie the Pooh character meal is. Now, at first I kind of thought this was, a coincidence that, this was a nod to maybe the Crystal Palace and to the exhibitions, the World's Fairs in general, but I realized after doing research for this specific podcast that this was completely not accidental, and this is just one example of how the World's Fair finds itself throughout Disney World. Okay, so what about some more history with the World's Fair? The first World's Fair held in the U.S. was actually in Philadelphia for the centennial in 1876. Now, I wanted to mention this because I have a personal connection with the World's Fair, and this is where my fascination with the World's Fair begins. My father is from Philadelphia, so there's a lot of history with our country that I know is in Philadelphia. My dad was always telling me about it, and I've touched the Liberty Bell, and I've been to Independence Hall. I've been to the steps where Rocky runs up down the steps too. But there's another connection, and that is my grandfather, which is my father's father. He actually visited two of the World's Fairs in the same year. In New York, in 1936. Yes. Nope, I was wrong. Sorry. In 1939, he went to the New York World's Fair, which was only maybe 90 miles from his home. And this is when my grandfather would have been 21 years old. But in the same year then, he decided that he wanted to go across the country to San Francisco, which was going to be hosting the next World's Fair. So they kind of overlapped. Like you would have one that would be 1 year, and then the next year they would already have some things in place. They would already be working on it, kind of like how we do even now for the Olympics. We start, years ahead of time. Well, they had to build these structures, and so they were starting early. And so he actually got to go to 2 World's Fair within 1 year, the New York one in 39 and then the San Francisco one. And he went cross country, riding on top of trains to get there, working his way across the country as a farmhand. And so I loved hearing my dad telling me these stories of my grandfather. And I think that part of my love, my wanderlust, my love for travel is from both my grandmother on my mom's side, so my mom's mother, and my grandfather on my dad's side, my dad's father. So he got to go to 2 World's Fairs. He was planning on going to Alaska, but then had to come home because of a family emergency. So he had to cut his trip short and not get to do that. So whenever I have the chance to see an icon from the World's Fair, I love to do that. And sometimes it's on purpose, and then other times it's accidental. I think probably one of the first that I got to see that a lot of people don't even associate with the World's Fair is in Paris. The exhibition in 1889 featured the Eiffel Tower. So if you have been to Paris and you have seen the Eiffel Tower, then that is connected with the World's Fair. Also, the 1904 St. Louis, Missouri World's Fair, you can go see the flight cage where they had all these magnificent birds, and it is located now in the St. Louis Zoo. Another one I just saw recently, which is something that inspired this podcast episode to begin with, was the Tower of the Americas in San Antonio. When we went there for spring break, the tower, which is taller than the Space Needle in Seattle, it was from the World's Fair there in Texas. One that I almost got to see, but I didn't, so I don't know if this counts. It doesn't, was the Atomium from Brussels in the 1958 exhibition. So we were in Brussels. It was on my list to go see. I didn't even realize at that moment, because I've seen this iconic structure, this huge structure that looks like a molecule, something from outer space. I didn't realize before reading up about it then that it was from the World's Fair in 1958, and it's still in its location. But we ended up just exploring the capital city for the day instead. That was a side trip from Paris for us that we took by train. Others that, some that are still in their locations, the Unisphere, in the 1964 New York World's Fair. So there was more than one World's Fair in New York. It is still standing in a park in Flushing. Also, in San Francisco, California, the Palace of the Arts is the last glimpse of the 1915 exposition there. Other ones, the Tower of the Sun, which is in Japan. Now, here's some other interesting ones that I noted. I'm not notating every single one that's still standing, but some that I wanted to just bring up. There's the Maine State Building, which is located in the state of Maine. It was relocated to Maine from the Chicago World's Fair. The Biosphere of Montreal and Quebec. I've chose this one. It's still standing, but it looks suspiciously like Epcot's ball. If you've ever been to Epcot and you have you've done the ride that looks like it's inside the golf ball, that ride, it looks like the Biosphere, which is from the World's Fair in Quebec. There's a theater that is called the Golden Rondelle, now in Wisconsin, from the 1964 New York World's Fair. There's even a diner. So it doesn't have to just be structures. These can be things like a theater. There's a diner called the Oakley Diner that is now in Utah. And this is the one I think that is the most interesting. And it is the Uniroyal Giant Tire. It's an 80-foot tire in Allen Park, Michigan. Now, was this originally a giant tire that you could see from the interstate? No. It was part of the New York World's Fair. It was once the Ferris wheel in the New York World's Fair that they turned into this giant tire that's now on the side of the road. So sometimes you may go past an attraction from a World's Fair and you didn't even realize it had been repurposed from the World's Fair. All right, so I say all this to say there's some amazing structures that we can still see, some we cannot see. But I want to talk about the inspiration of the World's Fair. Millions of people were mesmerized by what they had seen, such as, Walt Disney himself. So as I am researching more and more about the World's Fair, I start to think of more and more connections with Disney. And this was not an accident, because Disney himself was inspired a lot by the World's Fair. You could even say that Disney World might not have existed if it were not for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. I'll tell you what I meant. Okay, so the idea of a permanent World's Fair was the inspiration for Epcot. So there could be that there was some inspiration for the biosphere of Montreal and Quebec. The World Showcase, where all of the different countries have their own structures, pavilions, the technology advancements that is in part of Epcot. The entire thing is a permanent World's Fair. So here I was thinking I needed a time machine to go to a World's Fair, and all I needed to do was go to Epcot, and I'm seeing a World's Fair that is ongoing. So I thought that was really interesting. Not only that, the New York World's Fair was paramount for Disney. He used it to test attractions, secure funding for Walt Disney World in Florida, and to develop new technology. 4 shows actually were premiered in 1964 at this World's Fair. It's a Small World, which if you've been to Disney, you know the reference. It's a Small World, first showcased at the World's Fair. The Carousel of Progress, I'll admit, that one may not be the most exciting attraction to us now, but at the time, that's what's so amazing. We take for granted how quickly rides, technology, and everything is advanced. But one of the reasons that it did advance is when you have people from all over the world, the great thinkers, the great inventors, the great architects coming together, and they are showcasing their biggest and brightest, right? The greatest and latest. They're showing this, and it's inspiring others. Another one, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Makes you think of President's Hall, Hall of the Presidents, right? And the last one, Ford's Magic Skyway. Maybe inspiration for the People Mover, right? That's what you think about. So he had 4 of these iconic rides from Magic Kingdom that were showcased at the World's Fair. It also proved that there was a market for Disney World in the East. Because remember, Disneyland was in California. And Disney World had not been created yet in Florida, but there is a demand for it. And this World's Fair was not only how he secured funding, but could see that there was definitely going to be an interest. Some other things about Walt Disney with the connection to the World's Fair. His father worked at the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. I did not know that, right? So just think, he grew up when he was a little boy hearing stories of the World's Fair from his father. And here's what I think is truly magical. Walt attended the 1939 New York World's Fair, the exact same one that my grandfather did. The same one my grandfather attended. Walt Disney was there. Now, he was older. I think he was about 17 years older than my grandfather. But they were at the same one. They could have brushed shoulders. They could have been standing beside each other looking at the same exhibits, being inspired by the same things, because my grandfather obviously loved trains. That was how he rode across the country. And we know that Walt Disney World loved trains. So I like to think that maybe even in passing, they could have walked past each other. Maybe one nodded at the other. I don't know. They might not have even seen each other at all. They might not have even been there on the same day. But I like to think that they were. And that could be another thing that I share in common with this love for the World's Fair, is that I love how it showcases the best in our world, right? And it's a time when the countries would come together. Very similar, like we said before, to the Olympics, where you have the world coming together, your brightest, your best, your top, and there's sharing knowledge so we can all advance together. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. If you have been anywhere that was inspired by the World's Fair or has a landmark from the World's Fair and you want to share that with us, we would love to see it on our Facebook group, Heather and Logan Tate Whimsical Destinations. I'll be sure to share some this week from pictures that I have that were inspired or were featured in World's Fairs throughout the generations. Have a great week, and remember, whatever you do, life is a great adventure. Make the most of it.
This show is made possible by JC Media, LLC in Ripley, Mississippi. JC Media owns the Shark 102.3 Classic Rock FM radio station where the show is hosted. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app or stream episodes online at shark1023.com/podcasts. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That email is theshark1023@gmail.com.